What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another week of striper migration reports from On the Water. My name is Matt Haeffner. I'm the assistant editor here at On the Water magazine, and it's been another stellar week of striped bass fishing. So, beginning the striped bass fishing in Maryland, Virginia, and Chesapeake Bay, we've got stripers biting in coastal Virginia off the beach. They're hitting on sand fleas and chunked bait, and anglers are catching a mix of striped bass up to 30 plus inches in the wash with bluefish on everything from plugs and chunked bait up to Assateague Island. Now, up inside Chesapeake Bay, there are stripers lingering around most of the river mouths, and they can especially be caught in the early morning hours on topwater lures and light soft plastic jigs, especially if you're casting around sod banks and the ends of sandy flats. The edges of sandy flats are great spots. The stripers use them as ambush points, find some moving water, throw a topwater spook before that sun gets high in the sky. Striped bass fishing in the Middle Bay is still a bit of a struggle this week, with the shipping channel edges being the main target area, and the fishing is just not materialized, really. People are trying to find fish by trolling mojos and paddle tails, but the fish just don't seem to be staging in the normal areas that they would this time of year. Meanwhile, in the lower bay, from the Potomac River down to about the York River, there's great fishing on both sides of the bay for striped bass. Again, casting topwater walk-the-dog style lures or soft plastic paddle tails along the shallow edges of sod banks and marshes is a great way to find stripers early in the morning. In deeper areas, anglers are live lining with spot, jigging with 6 to 8 inch soft plastic paddle tail swim baits like No Live Bait Needed or Big Bait Fishing Co. And when the stripers are being particularly finicky, they're using soft crab baits and having some mixed success. That's unfortunate that the fishing in the Middle Bay hasn't quite picked up, but at least there's some fishing in the lower bay sections, as well as out on those Atlantic-facing beaches. Now, moving up the coast a little bit to southern New Jersey, there are some good reports of striped bass mixed in with bluefish in the back bays. They're really hugging those bridge abutments, and the best bet to finding some striper action is going to be targeting the shadow lines and bridges at night. Small paddletail swim shads, medium-sized glide baits, and minnow plugs are getting it done for anglers that are fishing those bridges around the night hours. But the beach bite has taken a little bit of a dive. There's still stripers in the wash. They're going to be hitting on sand fleas, clams, and bunker chunks. The only thing is you risk catching a couple dogfish or nuisance species like rays, drum, things of that nature. So if you're a striped bass fisherman from Cape May to about Absecon Bay, pick up some paddletail swim shads, grab a couple buddies, and head down to the bridge at night and see what you can do. There should be fish up to about 30 inches in the backwaters, but the action is really going to be restricted to the nighttime again because that water temperature during the day is just a little bit too high for stripers to be actively feeding higher in the water column. You might find some luck jigging those soft plastics on the bottom, but the best bet is still going to be running them in and out of the shadow lines of those bridge abutments. Now, contrary to what's going on in southern New Jersey, most of the action in northern New Jersey has been out front. The bass bite held strong on the beaches this week with great reports of slot fish being landed on sand fleas. And if you're not fishing from the surf, there are still massive schools of trophy striped bass sitting out front that are hitting on everything from live line bunker, metal lip swimmers, and eels. So there have been some very large bluefish mixed in with these 30-pound class stripers around Sandy Hook, but all of those fish are smashing plugs in the surf. Metal lip swimmers are a great option, as well as big surface swimming minnow plugs. And moving up the coast on the south shore of western Long Island, there's some fantastic bass fishing to be had out front with 50-pound class stripers cruising around bunker pods. If you've got flutter spoons, large top waters like the dock, and big paddletail swim shads, you are in good shape to fish around these bunker schools with artificial lures. However, snagging or cast netting a school of bunker and transferring them to a circle hook from the live well is a great option if you're looking to dial in on some trophy class striped bass. And while those 30 to 50 pound fish stay on the bunker schools out front, anglers in the back bays are still finding good success with slot sized fish, jigging slightly smaller paddle tails and throwing top waters around the sod banks and rocky outcroppings where there's plenty of current pushing water around a point. Channels just inside the inlets are always a great place to try too. You're going to have constant bait moving in and out of those inlets, but there's no promises that there aren't bluefish and weak fish mixed in. In the western Long Island Sound, there's been an influx of sand eels and silver sides this past week, so a lot smaller bait than we've got going on the South Shore, but it's a fly angler's dream. This past week has seen some slick, calm conditions, so if you've been able to get out there with a fly rod and you find those schools of sand eels, you're going to find some bass beneath them. There have been mixed schools of bunker here and there, but the bluefish have been shredding through those like it's their job. Now, the further east we go on the South Shore of Long Island, there's plenty of sand eels to be had in the surf, and that's creating a good bite for bass anglers that are dragging small soft plastics, flies, and bucktails through the wash. This is the time of year where it wouldn't hurt to throw in a teaser either. And with those sand eels, we've gotten reports that the fishing in Montauk has improved a little bit, but a lot of those big bass are still hanging out on the North Fork in those deep rips, where anglers three-weighing live eels or bucktails are finding great success with big bass up to 40 pounds. So the boat crowd in the eastern Long Island Sound is having a great week. There are plenty of big bass on bunker schools in the eastern Long Island Sound, not so much in the western Sound as they were in weeks past. And again, if you do find those bunker, you're likely going to find some bluefish with those bass. So up your leader strength. And if you're jigging in a really deep environment, use wire leader. Skipping over across the Long Island Sound to Connecticut, we've got stripers in the 30-plus pound range moving into the shallow flats and around the river mouths, where they're hitting big topwater plugs like the Dock, the Game On X-Walk, the Joe Bag Skipper, and even some large topwater soft plastics. However, the fish have been particularly finicky unless you're fishing during the low light hours of early morning or late in the afternoon around dusk. And even though large soft plastics and eel imitators like the GT eel are great options for rigging on a beast-style owner hook or something of that sort, you're most likely going to be sacrificing some soft plastics to those blues. And for anglers fishing a little deeper in the Sound, maybe you're not a surf caster, maybe you don't have access to a kayak or something like that, but you do have a boat, you can get out into the middle of the Sound and hunt those bunker pods. Cast net them, snag them, do what you got to do. Just make sure you live line them, put them on an inline circle hook, and let them swim right back down to the bottom of that school where the bass should be waiting for them. And a little bit further up the coast in Rhode Island, we're starting to see that smorgasbord of bait that in weeks past has started in Buzzards Bay. There are scup everywhere around the rocks in Narragansett Bay, so keep that in mind if you're a surf caster fishing from the boulders. There are still scattered schools of bunker inside the bay, and there are slot stripers and some big bluefish mixed in with them. Blues have been a crazy nuisance for striped bass fishermen this year, but it's great to see them making such a strong run. Meanwhile, out front, sand eels are fueling blitzes along the Rhode Island coast, and much like fly fishermen on the south side of Long Island and up in the Long Island Sound, it is a fly fisherman's dream right now. Now, a lot of those fish chasing the sand eels seem to be a smaller class around the low 20-inch range, but they are all fresh migratory schoolies, and they are all covered in sea lice. And as picky as those little bass can be when they're slurping down sand eels, it is an absolute spectacle to see when you're out on the water. There's nothing like it. If you have a small enough topwater, you might be able to cast it in there and pull a couple bass, but these schools of sand eels are getting pushed with the tide, so your shot might be a very small window. I don't know about you, but when I start to hear that there are sand eels around, I start loading up on Joe Bag sand eels. They're some of the best imitators on the market these days, and they just look so realistic. You can't beat that little paddle tail action. The subtlety of it looks just like a sand eel swimming in the water, so check those out for sure. Now, around Cape Cod and Buzzards Bay, there are fresh migratory schoolies just like there are out front in Rhode Island, except they're piling into the backwaters of the salt ponds and the estuaries on Cape Cod. Meanwhile, in Buzzards Bay, the harbors and marinas are filling up with bunker schools, and sometimes there aren't even bass under them, but when there are, they're 40-plus inches. And a lot of those bunker have also pushed up into the rivers, so if you're fishing at night, bring some minnow plugs, metal-lipped swimmers, and glide baits to mimic those large S patterns of a wounded bunker. The Cape Cod Canal is fishing well this week. It hasn't been as great as it was in weeks past, but there's some good topwater action at the west end on the breaking tides, especially early in the morning, even if that breaking tide doesn't line up with sunrise. And the east end of the canal seems to be a bit more of a jig bite. There are mackerel that have piled up on the east end, and more recently there are some massive schools of sand eels as well, so fly guys are having a field day up there. Now, I'm not positive because I'm not a meteorologist, but it's totally possible that some of those sustained northeast winds that New England experienced this past week pushed those sand eels right down into Cape Cod Bay, leading to some fantastic blitzes that have happened earlier this week. And additionally, on the south side of Cape Cod, there are some striped bass from the low 30 to high 40-inch range that have been clobbering squid in the rips, along with some big bluefish. And on top of the squid bite, Vineyard and Nantucket Sounds are absolutely loaded with scup right now. So if you're fishing around any of those jetties, you can bet that there are probably some stripers lingering not too far off from the jetty, waiting to pick off stray scup in the 5 to 10-inch range. So if you've got some large paddle tails, especially in white, pink, or silver, glide baits will work as well too, especially if they're a sinking glide. Those are some great ways to trick bass into feeding on what appears to be a scup. So from the south shore of Massachusetts up to Boston, the herring run has started to wane, but all the action that was previously up in the rivers the past few weeks has now shifted out into the harbors and bays. 30-plus pound striped bass are harassing herring on the surface during the low light hours, especially in the early morning. And with those tinker mackerel around too, it can't hurt to keep a few minnow plugs on board with those large topwaters. Now, a little bit later in the day, as those herring schools start to seek out deeper water, flutter spoons are an absolute must-have on board. The action perfectly mimics a herring in distress, and the striped bass have been keyed in on them. Now, while herring, mackerel, and tinker mackerel have been the main source of forage across much of the south shore of Massachusetts up into the greater Boston area, the north shore of Massachusetts has actually seen a bit of a run of hickory shad this past week. If you're a light tackle angler or a fly guy, hickory shad can be a lot of fun on their own, but they are a fantastic striped bass bait as well. So when those large schools of hickory shad are in thick, there's no better way to fish through the food chain than taking out a light tackle rod or a fly rod, catching a couple hickory shad, throwing them in the live well, and then pitching them back out on an inline circle hook. And because some of these hickory shad grow to be 16 plus inches, some of the bass that feed on them can be absolutely massive. Now, around the Merrimack River in coastal New Hampshire, there have been a lot of mackerel around, but with those herrings slowly moving out of the rivers, the bait of choice could go either way. When the mackerel are around in numbers, it's always good to have some minnow plugs on you, especially the mackerel-colored Daiwa SP minnows. You just can't beat them. And with those herring moving in and out of the lower portions of these rivers like the Piscataqua and the Merrimack, large flutter spoons are a must-have on board when the fish are deep, but a couple large walk-the-dog style topwater lures like the Dock or the Game On X-Walk are must-haves as well. Seems like a lot of the fish chasing mackerel and herring around New Hampshire and southern Maine right now fall within that slot size, but a lot of them are going to be pushing 40 inches and over. And in southern Maine, some of those herring-run rivers are slowing down a little bit, but by covering water with large topwater lures and swim shads and things of that nature, surf casters are covering all their bases. Meanwhile, the anglers out there in kayaks and boats are chasing the birds because there's actually been reports of sand eels pushing up along the coast. And again, where you find those sand eels, you're probably going to find some of those fresh migratory fish in that low 20-inch range. It is possible to find some bigger bass with them, but the bigger bass are most likely going to be swimming in the shadows of whatever herring are still leaving those rivers like the Saco, the York, and the Kennebunk. It looks like it's shaping up to be a great weekend to be out on the water. With a lot of that summer forage base moving in, the stripers are going to be on the move and feeding heavily. So I hope you have some time to get out there, enjoy the fishing and stay safe. And if you haven't done so already, consider signing up for Striper Cup. We give away weekly prizes just for catching and releasing striped bass. You can submit photos of your catches online. And at the end of the 20-week Striper Cup, we have Striper Fest here in Falmouth, where you could possibly win a raffled off Tidewater CC 210. Check it out at stripercup.com. And thanks again for watching another Striper Migration Report from On the Water.